He inherited only a parrot. But what it said was worth more than the entire inheritance combined. Arthur Harrison never imagined that the most humiliating day of his life would also be the beginning of a discovery that would change everything forever. At 42, he had always been considered the family failure, living off odd jobs while his siblings built brilliant careers and considerable fortunes. That Tuesday morning, everyone was gathered at the law office of Mr. Sterling for the reading of their father's will. Grant, the older brother and successful businessman, drummed his fingers on the mahogany table while adjusting his Italian suit that cost more than Arthur's annual salary. Victoria, the middle child and renowned lawyer, flipped through documents with the precision of someone accustomed to handling substantial inheritances. Arthur, meanwhile, remained quiet in the corner, wearing the only dress shirt he owned, patched at the left elbow. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat before beginning the reading. His voice echoed solemnly in the room lined with law books and framed certificates. To my son Grant Harrison, I leave the transportation company Harrison & Sons Logistics, including the entire fleet of trucks, the warehouses, and the business accounts, the lawyer announced while Grant smiled in satisfaction. To my daughter Victoria Harrison, I leave the 3-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, the beach house in the Hamptons, and the savings account at Federal Trust, he continued, making Victoria sigh in relief. Arthur's stomach tightened. He knew little was left, but still held a small hope of receiving something that would help him escape the desperate financial situation he was in. Maybe the house where they grew up, or at least some saved money. And to my son, Arthur Harrison. Mr. Sterling's voice paused for a moment that felt eternal. I leave my parrot Captain and his cage. The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur felt his face burn with shame, while Grant and Victoria exchanged looks of relief and malicious amusement. Captain, the green and yellow parrot that their father always kept in the corner of the room, chattering random phrases throughout the day. Are you sure that's all? Arthur managed to ask, his voice coming out weaker than he would have liked. According to the document, yes. Your father was very specific about each item, Mr. Sterling replied, flipping through the pages once more to confirm. Grant couldn't hide a smirk. Well, Arthur, at least you got a companion to talk to, he commented, prompting a muffled snicker from Victoria. Maybe the parrot has more sentimental value, Victoria added, feigning solidarity, but the sarcastic tone was unmistakable. Arthur swallowed his wounded pride and nodded. He didn't have the energy to argue or question. All his life he had gotten used to leftovers, to being the last one remembered, the brother who always needed financial help and could never repay. 2 hours later, Arthur walked along Broadway carrying the heavy iron cage where Captain swayed nervously with the movement. The parrot was almost 15 years old and had been with his father since it was a chick. It was a beautiful animal with bright green feathers and vibrant yellow patches on its head and chest, but Arthur had no idea how to take care of such a creature. His studio apartment in Astoria barely had room for himself, let alone a noisy parrot. Arthur climbed the 3 flights of stairs, groaning under the weight of the cage and his own discouragement. The apartment smelled of dampness and had only the essentials: a twin bed, a 2-burner stove, a small refrigerator that made too much noise, and a plastic table with 2 mismatched chairs. He placed the cage near the window, figuring the parrot would enjoy watching the street activity. Captain looked around with curiosity, moving his head from side to side. Well, Captain, now it's just the 2 of us, Arthur murmured, uncapping the water bowl and checking if there was enough food. 2 losers living together. To his surprise, the parrot tilted its head and stared directly at him. Not a loser. Not a loser, Captain repeated in a clear voice, making Arthur smile for the first time that day. During the first week, Arthur tried to adapt to the parrot's company. Captain woke up early and slept with the sun, chattering during the day, repeating phrases he had learned from his father. Phrases like, "Good morning, family," and "Where's my coffee?" and "Arthur, come here, boy." Hearing his own name in his father's voice, even through the parrot, stirred his emotions in unexpected ways. Arthur worked as a gas station attendant at a station 2 blocks from home. His salary barely covered the rent for the studio apartment and basic bills, leaving little for food. And now he needed to buy bird feed for Captain. Sometimes he came home so tired he forgot to talk to the parrot, who stayed quiet in the corner of the cage. It was on a Thursday evening, after a particularly tough day at the station, that Arthur noticed something strange. Captain was more restless than usual, pacing back and forth in the cage and repeating a phrase he had never said before. "Don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone," the parrot kept repeating insistently, flapping his wings nervously. Arthur stopped eating his instant ramen noodles and paid attention. "What is it, Captain? What can't I tell anyone?" The parrot stared directly at him and lowered his voice as if about to tell a secret. "The safe behind the painting. The safe behind the painting," Captain whispered, tilting his head in an almost human way. Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. He had never heard the parrot talk about any safe. Could it be that his father had taught him these specific phrases? And what painting was that? All night long, Arthur kept thinking about the parrot's words. He knew the house where he grew up well, every room, every piece of furniture. He didn't remember any safe, but there were several paintings scattered on the walls. The most likely one would be the family portrait that hung in the main living room, an old photo where everyone appeared smiling during a Sunday barbecue. On Friday, Arthur called in sick to work and decided to investigate. His father's house was in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood, on a large lot with a garden that he himself had helped plant as a teenager. Grant had kept the keys and planned to sell the property to split the money with Victoria, but he hadn't arranged the necessary paperwork yet. Arthur knew every corner of that house. He knew that the back bathroom window didn't close properly because he had broken the lock during a game years ago. He climbed the low back wall and entered through the window, feeling a painful nostalgia as he stepped into the empty house. Everything was exactly as his father had left it, the furniture covered with white sheets, the characteristic smell of a closed house mixed with the scent of lavender that his mother used to use before she passed away. Arthur walked directly to the main living room, where the family portrait still hung on the main wall. It was a large photo in an ornate wooden frame. It showed the whole family gathered during the last Christmas they spent together, 2 years before his father got sick. Everyone was smiling, including himself, who at that time still had hopes of getting his finances stable. Carefully, Arthur took the painting off the wall. Behind it, discreetly embedded in the wall, there was indeed a small digital safe. His heart raced. Captain was right, but how to open it? He returned home with his mind buzzing with possibilities. As soon as he entered the studio apartment, Captain started getting restless again. 6, 2, 8, 5, 9, 1, 6, 2, 8, 5, 9, 1. The parrot hummed the numbers as if they were a song. Arthur wrote down the sequence on a sheet of paper. Could it be the safe combination? Had his father really trained Captain to store that information? His rational mind said it was impossible, but the facts were right there, impossible to ignore. The next morning, Saturday, Arthur returned to his father's house. This time he entered through the front door, using the spare key buried under the lemon tree in the backyard. He went straight to the safe hidden behind the family portrait. With his hands trembling slightly, he typed in the sequence Captain had hummed, 6 to 2, 8, 5, 9, 1. The safe let out a low beep, and the small door opened with a soft click. Inside the safe was a brown paper folder and a sealed envelope with Arthur written in his father's careful handwriting. Arthur took both items reverently, as if they were sacred relics. The folder contained bank documents for a checking account he knew nothing about. The statement showed a balance that made him blink several times to make sure he was reading correctly. $320,000. The envelope contained a 2-page handwritten letter. Arthur read it with tears in his eyes. "My dear son Arthur, if you are reading this letter, it means Captain has fulfilled his mission and guided you here. I know you must be surprised and perhaps confused, but there is an explanation for everything. For years I watched my 3 children carefully. Grant was always ambitious and determined, traits that led him to business success, but also made him distant and self-serving. Victoria developed a brilliant mind and built an admirable career, but she lost her humility and empathy along the way. You, my son, were always different. Too kind for this competitive world, too generous to ever accumulate wealth. Your siblings only visited me when they needed something or when they wanted to impress someone with the well-put-together family. You came here every Sunday, even when you didn't have enough money for the bus fare, just to talk and see how I was doing. Remember when you sold your only dress shoes to buy medicine for my high blood pressure? Or when you worked 2 weeks as a porter at the Central Market just to pay for the repair of the television that broke during a national team game? Those gestures never went unnoticed. Arthur had to stop reading to wipe away his tears. He continued, "That's why I decided you deserved a second chance in life, but I needed to be sure you would reach this treasure for the right reasons. I trained Captain for 2 years to memorize the necessary information. Only someone who spent time with him every day, with patience and affection, would be able to uncover the secrets. The money in this account is yours by right, but there is an important condition, Arthur. On the following pages of this letter, you will find a list of 15 families in our community who are going through financial difficulties. Your true inheritance is not just the money, but the mission to continue the charity work I had been doing in secret for over 10 years. Use the money to help these families, son. Pay off debts, fund medical treatments, pay for the children's education. Make a difference in their lives as you always did in mine. In return, I am certain you will find a wealth far greater than any monetary value, the satisfaction of being useful to others. I trust you, my dear Arthur. I always have. With eternal love, your father, George Harrison." Arthur finished the letter openly sobbing. He remained sitting on the floor of the empty living room for almost an hour, absorbing everything he had discovered. His father not only loved him, but had also seen in him qualities he himself didn't recognize. More than that, he had devised an elaborate plan to reward his natural kindness. The following pages contained detailed information about 15 families in the neighborhood. Arthur Harrison recognized some names. Mrs. Martha, who lived 3 houses down and was raising 4 grandchildren alone after her married daughter had to move to another state. Mr. Arthur, a retiree who used part of his pension to buy expensive diabetes medication for his wife. Mrs. Gladys's family, struggling to pay for physical therapy for her son after a motorcycle accident. Each family had its own story of struggle described in impressive detail. His father had a deep understanding of each one's situation and left specific suggestions on how Arthur could help efficiently and discreetly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Arthur returned home in a state of emotional shock. Captain greeted him excitedly, as if he knew the mission had been accomplished successfully. Good boy, repeated the parrot, flapping his wings cheerfully. During the night, Arthur reread the letter several times and studied each case his father had described. The first family on the list was Mrs. Martha's. According to the notes, she was 3 months behind on rent and at risk of eviction. The 4 grandchildren were between 6 and 14 years old, completely dependent on their grandmother, since their parents moved to New York City looking for work. On Monday morning, Arthur asked for a day off from the station and drove to the real estate agency handling Mrs. Martha's rent. He made up a story about being a family friend, interested in paying off the debt anonymously. The receptionist thought the request was odd, but accepted the money and arranged the payment. In the afternoon, Arthur watched from behind a tree as the agent arrived at Mrs. Martha's house to inform her that the debt had been paid by an anonymous benefactor. The elderly woman's reaction was total disbelief, followed by tears of gratitude. She knelt right there on the sidewalk and thanked heaven for the unexpected help. Arthur felt an indescribable emotion filling his chest. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Better than receiving money, better than any material pleasure he knew. It was the pure sensation of having made a concrete and meaningful difference in someone's life. In the following days, Arthur studied the second case on the list. Mr. Arthur needed to buy special insulin for his diabetic wife, but the medication cost nearly $400 a month, an amount that severely strained the family budget. Arthur went to the pharmacy where the couple usually bought their medicines and deposited enough money to cover the treatment for the next 6 months, again requesting anonymity. With each family he helped, Arthur discovered a growing satisfaction. He began to understand why his father had chosen this mission for him. It wasn't just about handing out money. It was about rebuilding the community, strengthening bonds of solidarity, and creating a network of mutual support. Captain seemed to approve of every action. The parrot had developed a new habit. Whenever Arthur came home after helping someone, he would hum cheerful tunes he had never shown before. It was as if the animal could feel the positive energy emanating from these charitable acts. 2 weeks later, Arthur was helping the third family on the list when he received an unexpected call from Grant Harrison. "Arthur, we need to talk. Victoria and I found something odd in the documentation of the company I inherited." His brother's voice sounded tense and worried. "What kind of odd thing?" Arthur asked, feeling a knot in his stomach. "It seems Dad kept a bank account we didn't know about. The company accountant found references to regular deposits in an account we can't locate. Didn't you get any paperwork along with the parrot?" Arthur swallowed hard. Technically, he wasn't lying by denying it. Since Captain had guided him to the documents, he hadn't received them directly with the bird. "I didn't get anything besides the cage and the parrot itself," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Okay, but if you find out anything, let us know. Dad might have hidden money somewhere, and that belongs to all 3 children, not just you because you got the bird," Grant said in a tone Arthur knew well, the tone of someone who had already decided they were entitled to something. After hanging up, Arthur felt torn for the first time since discovering the secret inheritance. On one hand, he knew his father had been very clear in the letter. The money was specifically for him and the charitable mission. On the other hand, family pressure was starting to mount, and he knew well his siblings' persistence when they caught a whiff of money. Captain seemed to notice his state of mind and began repeating a new phrase. Clean heart, son of the heart." Arthur took this as encouragement to keep following his father's plan, regardless of outside pressures. In the following days, the situation grew complicated. Victoria hired a private accountant to investigate all of their father's financial transactions over the past 5 years. Grant started asking direct questions to neighbors and acquaintances about possible secret bank accounts or investments. Arthur accelerated the pace of the charity work, fearing his siblings would discover the truth before he could fully complete the mission. In 1 week, he helped 4 more families from the list. He paid for Harold's cataract surgery, funded school supplies for Mrs. Sarah's children, settled the loan on the bicycle that young Kayla Moore used for her delivery job, and covered 3 months' rent for Stephen's family, who had lost their job. Each action generated a positive reaction in the community. The families who were helped didn't know who the mysterious benefactor was, but they began helping each other more often. Mrs. Martha, now free from the pressure of overdue rent, went back to baking muffins to sell at her grandchildren's school. Mr. Arthur, relieved about his wife's medication costs, offered his carpentry services to neighbors who needed small repairs. Arthur watched these transformations with growing fascination. He now understood that his father had created much more than an individual charity plan. He had designed a sustainable social change where one generous act created positive waves that spread through the entire community. It was during this time that Arthur met Eleanor, a retired 68-year-old teacher who lived in the same building as the family he was helping that week. Eleanor had noticed Arthur discreetly visiting several houses in the neighborhood, and driven by the natural curiosity of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding people, decided to address the matter directly. "Excuse my nosiness, young man, but I can't help noticing you've been visiting many needy families in our neighborhood," she intercepted him one rainy afternoon as Arthur was leaving Mrs. Gladys's house. "Do you work for a charity?" Arthur felt embarrassed. He hadn't expected anyone to notice his pattern of visits. "Actually, no, ma'am. It's kind of complicated to explain," he replied, not quite sure how to dodge the situation. Eleanor smiled with the patience of someone who had dealt with evasive students for decades. "How about we have a cup of coffee and you try to explain it to me? I promise I know how to keep secrets and maybe I can help with whatever you're doing." Something about the retired teacher's warm manner reassured Arthur. For 40 minutes, in a small diner near the neighborhood square, he told the whole story. The seemingly unfair will, the discovery of the safe through the parrot, his father's letter, and the charitable mission he was carrying out. Eleanor listened to everything in silence, asking only a few specific questions to clarify details. When Arthur finished his account, she remained thoughtful for a few minutes before speaking. "Your father seems to have been a man of great wisdom," she finally commented. "And you are discovering something many people take a lifetime to learn, that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share." "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Arthur asked, seeking external validation for his actions. "I think you're doing exactly what needs to be done, but may I suggest something that might make your mission more efficient?" Arthur nodded, interested in any advice Eleanor might offer. "Instead of helping only financially, how about creating opportunities for these families to become self-sufficient? Teach them to fish instead of giving them the fish, as the saying goes." Eleanor's suggestion made perfect sense. Arthur realized he had been thinking too small. His father's money could do much more than just solve immediate problems. It could create lasting, transformative solutions. That night, Arthur reviewed the entire list of families with a new perspective. Instead of just paying off debts and covering expenses, he could invest in equipment, vocational courses, and income-generating opportunities. Captain was particularly restless during this reflection, repeating phrases Arthur had not heard before. "Teach them to fly, don't carry them in your lap." Arthur smiled, impressed once again with the parrot's ability to seem to understand exactly what was happening. His father had truly trained Captain to be much more than a pet. He was an oracle of wisdom for specific moments. The next day, Arthur sought out Mrs. Martha with a different proposal. Instead of simply covering expenses, he offered to help her set up a small industrial kitchen in her backyard where she could produce sweets and savory snacks to sell at events and diners in the area. "But I don't know anything about business, son," she protested, though Arthur could see interest growing in her eyes. "I'll help you learn." And teacher Eleanor, whom you probably know from the neighborhood, offered to give basic lessons in management and financial math. The proposal excited Mrs. Martha in a way Arthur had not anticipated. She had always been an excellent cook, famous in the neighborhood for the treats she prepared for church festivals. Turning that skill into a dignified source of income was a dream she had never dared to consider possible. In a week, Arthur had bought all the necessary equipment: industrial oven, professional mixer, commercial refrigerator, various utensils, and enough ingredients to start production. More importantly, he had enrolled Mrs. Martha in a food handling course and arranged the necessary documentation to legalize the small business. The transformation was impressive. Mrs. Martha, who used to live worried about basic bills, now woke up every day excited to work on her recipes. Her 4 grandchildren got involved in the project, helping with packaging, deliveries, and even suggesting new flavors based on trends they observed at school. The success of the small business came quickly. Orders started coming in through recommendations, and soon Mrs. Martha had to hire 2 neighbors to help with the growing demand. What had begun as a project to support a family became a source of employment for other people in the community. Arthur applied the same philosophy to the other families on the list. Mr. Arthur, who had woodworking skills but lacked proper tools, received a small workshop set up in his backyard. Mrs. Gladys's family got equipment to set up a community laundry. Young Kayla Moore received a new motorcycle and mechanics courses so she could expand her delivery services. Each project produced results that exceeded Arthur's initial expectations. The inheritance money wasn't just being spent, it was being invested in ways that multiplied and benefited people beyond the original 15 families on the list. Eleanor became a key partner in this process. As a retired teacher, she knew teaching techniques and had contacts at various educational institutions. She organized training courses tailored to the specific needs of each beneficiary family. 3 months after the project started, Arthur realized he had inadvertently created a solidarity economy network in the neighborhood. The families helped bought products and services from one another, creating a virtuous cycle where money circulated within the community instead of flowing out to large corporations. It was around this time that pressure from his siblings intensified dramatically. Victoria had hired a private detective to investigate Arthur's activities. The report revealed that he was spending considerable amounts of money on community projects, far more than his salary as a gas station attendant could afford. Grant and Victoria showed up at the door of Arthur's studio apartment on a Thursday afternoon, demanding explanations. "We know you're hiding something, Arthur," Victoria said bluntly, entering the apartment uninvited. Where are you getting the money to fund all these social projects in the neighborhood? Arthur felt the family pressure he had known since childhood, the feeling of being cornered by his more articulate and determined siblings. Social projects? I don't know what you're talking about. He tried to dodge, but he knew the denial wouldn't be convincing. Grant showed a folder with photographs and documents. We have reports from an investigator, Arthur. You were seen buying expensive equipment, paying for courses, funding businesses. All this in a week when you should be broke as usual. Captain, who had stayed quiet during the initial conversation, began to stir in his cage. The parrot paced back and forth, making sounds of protest as if he understood that Arthur was being threatened. Don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone. Captain started shouting, repeating the same phrase he had used to guide Arthur to the safe. Victoria and Grant exchanged looks, surprised by the parrot's specific reaction. Interesting how the bird repeats exactly that when we come here talking about money, observed Victoria, with her sharp lawyer instinct. Listen, Arthur, we don't want to fight with you. Grant tried a more diplomatic approach. If Dad left any additional inheritance, we have a right to know. We're all his children. Arthur felt cornered. On one hand, he didn't want to lie to his siblings. On the other, he knew that revealing the truth would mean the end of the mission his father had entrusted specifically to him. I'll be honest with you, he finally decided. Dad really did leave something extra, but not for me, for the community. He wanted me to manage a project to help the needy families in the neighborhood. It was a half-truth that didn't reveal the full extent of the inheritance or the specific condition that the money should only be used by Arthur. Victoria was not convinced. If it was for the community, why didn't he make that clear in the official will? Why all this charade with the parrot? Maybe because he knew you all too well, Arthur replied with a courage that surprised even himself. He knew that if you found out about additional money, you'd find a legal way to claim a share. The answer irritated Grant. Are you implying we're greedy? We built careers and earned our wealth through honest work, while you were always supported by the family? No, Grant. I'm saying you think about money first, people second. Dad knew that. The atmosphere in the small studio turned heavy. Victoria and Grant exchanged glances that Arthur knew well, the look of people plotting an attack strategy. All right, Arthur, Victoria said in a professional tone. We'll give you 48 hours to show us all the documentation about this supposed community inheritance. If you don't cooperate voluntarily, we'll take the necessary legal steps. After his siblings left, Arthur felt exhausted and confused. Captain had calmed down, but was still nervous, moving restlessly inside his cage. Arthur spent the whole night thinking about the situation. Could he reveal everything to his siblings and try to convince them to respect their father's wishes? Would he risk them creating legal obstacles that would prevent the community projects from continuing? Or should he keep the secret and face a family battle that could drag on for years? The next morning, a new complication arose when Arthur received an unexpected visit from an elegant man who introduced himself as Mr. Preston Vance, a lawyer representing the interests of Grant and Victoria. Mr. Harrison, my clients have reason to believe there is additional documentation related to your father's inheritance that was not presented during the official reading of the will. The lawyer spoke in the impersonal tone typical of professionals accustomed to tense negotiations. My clients are willing to resolve this matter amicably, but they need full transparency regarding any additional assets discovered after the initial distribution. Arthur felt intimidated by the lawyer's presence, but tried to maintain his composure. Mr. Vance, I can assure you, I did not receive any additional documentation during the reading of the will. What I inherited was exactly what was stated, the parrot and the cage. I understand your position, Mr. Harrison, but there is evidence of financial activity suggesting access to undeclared resources. My clients prefer to resolve this in a civilized manner, but they are prepared to request a full audit of your father's assets if necessary. The threat was clear. Arthur knew that a detailed audit would eventually uncover the secret bank account and the entire scheme his father had devised. He needed to buy time and find a way to protect both the mission and his father's memory. Mr. Vance, I just ask for a few days to organize my financial situation and clear up any misunderstanding about my ability to help people in the community." "Of course, Mr. Harrison. My clients are reasonable. Tuesday of next week would be a suitable deadline for a meeting where all issues are definitively clarified." After the lawyer left, Arthur felt desperate. He had only 5 days to find a solution that would protect the community projects without completely destroying his family relationship. It was at that moment that Captain began to display completely new behavior. The parrot stayed quiet for almost an hour, just watching Arthur with intense focus. Then, all of a sudden, he started repeating a sequence of words he had never spoken before. "Find Mrs. Betty from the bakery. Find Mrs. Betty from the bakery. Envelope for the son of my heart." Arthur was confused. He didn't know any Betty who worked in a bakery. But after 3 months of learning to trust Captain's guidance, he decided to investigate. There were 4 bakeries within a 10-block radius of his father's house. Arthur visited all of them, asking if any employee named Betty knew George Harrison, his father. At the 3rd bakery, a grey-haired woman with a warm smile recognized him immediately. "You're Arthur," exclaimed Mrs. Betty, stopping what she was doing to come closer. "Your father talked about you so much, and this is Captain, isn't it?" Arthur was surprised by the instant recognition of both him and the parrot. "You knew my father?" "Of course I knew him." Your George came here every Tuesday and Friday for over 2 years, always with Captain. They'd buy sweet bread and chat with me about life, family, everything. He told me that if anyone ever showed up here with Captain looking for Mrs. Betty from the bakery, I should hand over an envelope he left for safekeeping. Hold on, I'll go get it." Mrs. Betty disappeared into the back of the bakery and returned a few minutes later with an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed, and with the name Arthur, son of my heart, written in his father's familiar handwriting. Arthur opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a 1-page letter and a small key with a number engraved on it. The letter read, "My dear Arthur, if you've reached Mrs. Betty, it means Captain guided you correctly, and that you're facing pressure from your siblings to split the secret inheritance. Knowing Grant and Victoria as I do, I figured this might happen. This key opens a safe deposit box at Citizens Bank Downtown Branch, number 1247. Inside you'll find documents that definitively prove the money in the secret account was left specifically for you, with detailed justifications that no lawyer can challenge. Moreover, you'll discover that I also prepared conditional small inheritances for Grant and Victoria. I didn't forget them, son, but I wanted to make sure they'd learn the value of humility and generosity before receiving any further benefit. Keep trusting, Captain. He still has many important directions for you. With love and pride, your father, George." Arthur could hardly believe his father's remarkable foresight. He had even anticipated the reactions of his other children and prepared a solution to protect Arthur from family pressure. The next day, Arthur went to Citizens Bank downtown. Safe Deposit Box 1247 contained a thick folder with notarized documents, registry records, and even audio recordings where his father explained his inheritance intentions in detail. The material was irrefutable. His father had set up a legal trust specifying that Arthur would be the sole administrator of the funds, with the express mission of helping needy families in the community. Any attempt by other heirs to contest would automatically direct the entire funds to established charities, eliminating any possibility of personal use. Even more intriguing, there were documents proving the existence of smaller accounts in the names of Grant and Victoria, conditional on meeting specific criteria of behavioral change and community involvement. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit the like button and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners. Now, continuing. The criteria were detailed and precise. Grant Harrison could access his account after demonstrating genuine involvement in community projects for a minimum period of 12 months, proven through documentation and community references. Victoria Harrison would need to use her legal skills to offer free consulting to low-income families for the same period. Arthur Harrison realized his father hadn't been unfair to the other children. He had been strategic. He'd created a system that would force the entire family to reconnect with values of solidarity and community service. On Tuesday, as agreed, Arthur met with Grant, Victoria, and the lawyer Dr. Preston Vance at Mr. Sterling's office. He presented all the documents found in the bank safe, explaining in detail the system their father had created. The siblings' initial reaction was indignation. Victoria questioned the legal validity of such specific conditions imposed on heirs. Grant protested against what he considered emotional manipulation through financial blackmail. Dr. Vance, after carefully examining all the documents, confirmed that everything was perfectly legal and indisputable. Their father had taken extraordinary precautions to ensure his wishes were respected. Basically, the lawyer explained, you have two options: accept the conditions set by your father and work to fulfill them, or voluntarily renounce the conditional inheritances, which will be automatically directed to charity. Victoria proved more pragmatic than Grant. How long would we have to meet these conditions? According to the documents, the deadline is 18 months from today to demonstrate genuine involvement with community social projects, Dr. Vance replied. Grant was visibly irritated. This is ridiculous. We're successful people with complex professional responsibilities. We don't have time to play social worker. Arthur, who had remained quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. Grant, it's not about playing social worker. It's about discovering there's something more satisfying than accumulating money. I discovered that over the past few months. Easy to say that when you've never had real responsibilities, Arthur. Grant shot back bitterly. Maybe you're right, Arthur admitted, but it's also possible that I've discovered something you haven't experienced yet. How good it feels to be useful to people who truly need it. Victoria intervened before the discussion heated up further. We can debate philosophy later. Right now I want to understand something. Arthur, did you already know all this when you pretended to be surprised by our investigation? Arthur chose to be honest. I found out gradually, Victoria. Captain guided me step by step as Dad planned. I didn't lie to you, I just didn't tell you the whole truth because I knew you wouldn't understand. And now, asked Grant, you expect us to accept these ridiculous conditions just to access the money that should be ours by right? Actually, I hope you'll experience what I experienced, Arthur replied sincerely. For 3 months, I helped 15 families rebuild their lives. It was the most rewarding experience I've ever had. Victoria was thoughtful for a few minutes before speaking again. I admit I'm curious. What kind of social work have you been doing exactly? Arthur spent the next hour explaining in detail each project developed in the community. The enthusiasm grew in his voice as he described the transformations he had witnessed. Mrs. Martha becoming a successful small business owner, Mr. Arthur building custom furniture, Kayla Moore expanding her delivery services. Victoria seemed genuinely interested, especially when Arthur mentioned the legal aspects of the small businesses he had helped formalize. Nos, there are many people in the community who need basic legal guidance to legalize their activities, Arthur commented, watching Victoria attentively. Simple things like registering individual micro-entrepreneurs, understanding basic labor rights, sorting out documentation issues. And the business side? Grant asked, showing interest for the first time in the conversation. How did you organize the financing and follow-up for these small businesses? Actually, kind of winging it, Arthur admitted. I have zero experience in management. Eleanor, the retired teacher who has been helping me, does what she can, but I admit it would be much better to have someone who really understands business management. Grant and Victoria exchanged glances. Arthur realized he had planted a seed of genuine interest beyond the financial motivation. Can I suggest something? Arthur proposed. How about you visit some of the projects before deciding? See for yourselves what's been happening in the community. Then decide whether you want to get involved or not. Victoria accepted the proposal immediately. Grant showed initial reluctance, but eventually agreed, probably more out of curiosity than genuine interest. The following Saturday, Arthur organized a tour of the community projects. They started at Mrs. Martha's small candy factory, which now employed 6 women from the neighborhood and supplied products to 15 local snack bars. Mrs. Martha greeted the visitors with the natural enthusiasm of someone proud of her own work. She showed the equipment, explained the production process, and introduced the employees she had hired. Before Arthur helped me, I was desperate. Mrs. Martha told Victoria and Grant. 3 months behind on rent, my grandchildren asking for food, and I didn't know what to do. Today, besides supporting my family, I'm creating jobs for other single mothers in the neighborhood. Victoria was visibly impressed with the organization of the small business and began asking technical questions about documentation and legalization. She discovered that Mrs. Martha was facing some bureaucratic hurdles that could be easily resolved with proper legal guidance. "Mrs. Martha, I can help you sort out these documentation issues," Victoria offered spontaneously. "They're simple things, but they can avoid future problems." The next stop was Mr. Arthur's workshop. The elderly man had become a respected carpenter in the neighborhood, producing custom furniture and teaching the trade to young people interested in learning a profession. Grant carefully observed the organization of the work and asked several questions about costs, profit margins, and production planning. "Mr. Arthur, do you have adequate financial control of the business?" Grant asked with genuine interest. "Look, son, I know I'm making money because there's something left at the end of the month, but I admit I don't understand much of that accounting stuff," Mr. Arthur answered honestly. Grant immediately saw opportunities for optimization that could significantly increase the profitability of the small workshop. "With a bit of administrative organization, you could double your profit while keeping the same costs," Grant commented to Arthur as they watched Mr. Arthur working on a dresser. At the end of the day, after visiting all the projects, Victoria and Grant were visibly impacted. It wasn't just about the financial transformation of the families, but about the complete change in the community environment. "Arthur, I admit I underestimated what you've managed to do here," Victoria said sincerely. "It's not just charity, it's sustainable economic development on a small scale." Grant agreed, though he still showed some resistance. "Fayaz, it's impressive, but I still think it's problematic that Dad used emotional blackmail to force us to participate." "Maybe it's not blackmail, Grant," Victoria reflected. "Maybe it's an opportunity. How many times in life do we have a real chance to make a significant difference in the lives of people who truly need it?" The following week, Victoria started visiting the neighborhood regularly, offering free legal consulting to small business owners. She quickly discovered there was a huge demand for basic legal guidance she had never considered before. Grant took longer to make up his mind, but eventually proposed a business mentoring system where he would visit the small businesses monthly to help with financial planning and growth strategies. The arrival of the siblings to the project completely transformed the scale of the results. Victoria regularized the legal situation of dozens of small business owners, many of whom were operating informally due to lack of proper guidance. Grant implemented financial control systems that increased the average profitability of the businesses by 40%. Arthur watched this transformation with growing satisfaction. Their father had truly planned everything with impressive precision. He knew his children well enough to know exactly how to motivate each of them to discover potentials they themselves were unaware of. Captain continued to be the occasional oracle, providing timely guidance that always proved valuable. The Parrot had developed the habit of repeating specific people's names whenever there was a situation Arthur should investigate. It was through one of these tips that Arthur discovered Mrs. Florence's family, a 70-year-old widow who was raising 3 great-grandchildren alone after the children's parents died in a traffic accident. The situation was desperate. Mrs. Florence received a small pension that barely covered basic needs, and the children were at risk of having to be turned over to the social protection system. Arthur presented the case to Victoria and Grant during one of the weekly meetings they had established to discuss community projects. The situation deeply moved the 3 siblings, who decided to join forces to find a sustainable solution. Victoria discovered that Mrs. Florence was entitled to social benefits she wasn't receiving due to lack of information and proper documentation. Grant identified that the lady's house had enough space to set up a small home bakery, taking advantage of her natural cooking skills. Within 2 months, Mrs. Florence was receiving all the social benefits she was entitled to, was operating a small bakery that supplied fresh bread to the entire neighborhood, and had become one of the most talked-about success stories in the community. The children, who had previously been at risk of being separated from their great-grandmother, now attended a private school paid for by the bakery's profits and had much more promising future prospects. It was during the celebration of the first anniversary of Mrs. Florence's bakery that Arthur realized something fundamental had changed in the Harrison family dynamics. For the first time in decades, the three siblings were working together in harmony, each contributing their specific skills to common goals. Grant had discovered that he enjoyed mentoring small business owners much more than just managing his own transportation company. Victoria had found in community law practice a professional satisfaction that corporate law had never provided. Arthur, who had always considered himself the family failure, was now respected by his siblings as the visionary who had started an impressive social transformation. Captain watched everything from his special perch at Arthur's house, occasionally offering guidance that continued to astonish with its accuracy. The Parrot had become a kind of official mascot for the community projects, regularly visited by the families who benefited from them, who considered the animal a symbol of good luck. 18 months after the original reading of the will, Grant and Victoria had easily met all the conditions set by their father to access their conditional inheritances. But when the time came to claim the money, both hesitated. "Arthur, can I confess something?" Victoria said during a family meeting at the house that had belonged to their father. "I'm getting so much more personal satisfaction from this community work than I ever got from my previous career. I'm not sure I want to stop and go back to what I did before." Grant agreed. "You know what's funny? My logistics company is running better than ever because I've learned to delegate more, since I spend a good part of my time on community projects. And I've discovered I like teaching people to be entrepreneurs a lot more than I like competing in the market." Arthur smiled, remembering his father's words in the original letter. "True wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share." "How about we create an official foundation?" Arthur proposed. "We can use our individual inheritances as startup capital and turn all this into a permanent, sustainable project." The idea excited all three siblings. Victoria suggested the name George Harrison Foundation, in honor of the father who had planned this entire transformation. Grant proposed expanding the project to other underserved neighborhoods in the city, replicating the model that had worked so well in the initial community. Arthur suggested that Captain officially become the foundation's mascot, continuing his role as wise advisor for future important decisions. The George Harrison Foundation was officially established 2 years after the reading of the original will. The project had grown from 15 assisted families to over 200 families directly benefited, in addition to hundreds of other families indirectly impacted by the region's economic development. Mrs. Martha became the president of the Small Producers Cooperative that naturally emerged from the expansion of the projects. Mr. Arthur became the official instructor of the professional training program. Mrs. Florence coordinated a network of community bakeries that supplied bread to the entire region. Eleanor, the retired teacher who had become a key partner in the project, took over the foundation's educational coordination, developing teaching methodologies adapted for adults in vulnerable social situations. Arthur, who had started as the failed son who inherited only a parrot, became the executive director of a foundation recognized by the city as a model for sustainable community development. Victoria opened a community law office in the neighborhood, offering free legal services to the underserved population and legal guidance for small entrepreneurs. Grant expanded his logistics company to include a cooperative program where former foundation beneficiaries could partner as drivers, creating more stable income opportunities. Most impressive was how the project had created a culture of solidarity that perpetuated itself naturally. Families who had been helped years earlier now helped newly arrived families in the program. Former beneficiaries became mentors to new participants. Captain, now almost 20 years old, continued to be the foundation's occasional oracle. The Parrot had developed an impressive repertoire of motivational phrases that he repeated at appropriate moments, as if he truly understood the context of the situations. During the most tense meetings, when the siblings disagreed on strategies or directions, Captain would often repeat, "United family, double strength," a phrase that apparently their father had taught him specifically for those moments. When someone felt discouraged about a project that wasn't working out as expected, the Parrot would hum, "Patience and persistence, always in the exact tone George Harrison had used to encourage his children during their childhood. Arthur often found himself talking to Captain as if the parrot were a direct channel of communication with his father. He didn't believe in anything supernatural, but he couldn't deny that the animal seemed to possess a wisdom that went beyond simple training. "Captain, I think Dad would be proud of what we've accomplished," Arthur would comment during quiet afternoons when he was reviewing progress reports on the community projects. "Daddy's pride, Daddy's pride," Captain would invariably respond, flapping his wings in what seemed like enthusiastic approval. 5 years after the reading of the will, the George Harrison Foundation had become a national reference in community development. Arthur received invitations to lecture at universities on solidarity economy. Victoria had published a book on public interest law. Grant had developed business mentorship methodologies that were being replicated in several cities across the country. But the most important thing for the three siblings was the family relationship they had rebuilt. They had Sunday lunch together every week at the same table where they grew up, now set up at the Foundation's headquarters. They talked about future projects, shared stories about the families they were helping, and planned expansions and improvements. Captain participated in these family lunches as an official family member, occasionally offering comments that always drew smiles from everyone present. During one of these Sunday lunches, Arthur made an observation that perfectly summed up what had happened to their lives. "Do you realize that none of us uses the money from our individual inheritances for personal expenses anymore? Everyone lives off their own work and invests Dad's money in the community projects." Victoria confirmed, "That's true. I've discovered I live much better on my salary from public interest law than I did on the profits from corporate law. It's less money, but far more satisfaction." Grant agreed. "My logistics company is more profitable than ever, so I don't need to touch the inheritance. And the work with the foundation gives me a purpose I never had just making money." Arthur smiled, remembering the original letter from his father. "I think Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't leave us money. He left us missions that turned us into better people." Captain, as if he had perfectly understood the conversation, repeated a phrase he had never said before. "Mission accomplished, son of my heart." The three siblings looked at each other, moved. Even after 5 years, Captain kept surprising them with revelations that seemed to come directly from their father's wisdom. That afternoon, Arthur decided to visit his father's grave for the first time since the burial. He took Captain along, carefully carrying the cage during the walk through the cemetery. In front of the simple headstone engraved with "George Harrison, loving father and dedicated citizen," Arthur spoke out loud, as if his father could hear him. "Dad, I want you to know I understood the lesson. We weren't a divided family, because some were successful and others weren't. We were divided because each of us only thought about ourselves. You taught us that true wealth lies in using our talents to help those in need." Captain remained quiet throughout the entire speech, as if he knew it was a solemn moment. But when Arthur finished speaking, the parrot whispered softly, "Family together. Father happy. Father happy." Arthur returned home with a heart full of gratitude. He had started this journey as the failed son who inherited only a parrot. He ended as a fulfilled man who had discovered his true purpose in life. Captain lived to be 25 years old, an exceptional age for a parrot. During his last months, he became quieter, spoke less, but kept observing everything with the penetrating intelligence he had always shown. On the day Captain died peacefully during a sunny Sunday afternoon, Arthur, Victoria, and Grant were gathered beside the cage. The parrot looked at each of the siblings as if saying goodbye and whispered one last phrase: "Always family, always together." They buried Captain in the garden at the Foundation headquarters, under a jabuticaba tree that George Harrison had planted years before. They placed a small plaque. "Captain, messenger of wisdom and unifier of the Harrison family." The George Harrison Foundation continued to grow and help thousands of families over the years. Arthur, Victoria, and Grant maintained the tradition of Sunday lunches, always keeping an empty place at the table where Captain's cage used to sit. Occasionally, when they faced difficult decisions about the Foundation's direction, one of the siblings would comment, "What would Captain say about that?" and they invariably arrived at wise solutions that honored both their father's memory and that of the parrot who had been the instrument of their reconciliation. Arthur never married, dedicating his entire life to community work. Victoria married a lawyer she met during a foundation project, and they had 2 children who grew up frequenting the institution's headquarters as if it were their second home. Grant reconciled with his ex-wife, from whom he had divorced years earlier due to disagreements over life priorities, and they renewed their marriage in a simple ceremony held in the Foundation's garden. 20 years after the reading of the original will, the George Harrison Foundation had directly helped more than 15,000 families and indirectly impacted entire communities. The model developed by the Harrison siblings was being replicated in 12 U.S. states. Arthur, now a 62-year-old man nationally respected as an expert in community development, often ended his lectures by telling the story of how he inherited only a parrot and discovered that was the most valuable inheritance he could have received. "My father taught me that there are 2 kinds of wealth in the world," Arthur would say to moved audiences. "The wealth we accumulate for ourselves, which dies with us, and the wealth we share with others, which multiplies forever." Captain was the messenger who guided me to discover which kind of wealth truly matters. The story of the Harrison family became legend in the community where it all began. Children who had been helped by the first projects grew up and became adults who also dedicated part of their lives to helping others. Mrs. Martha, now a grandmother of 15, continued operating her small candy factory at 80 years old, now helped by children and grandchildren who had transformed the business into a respected family company. Mr. Arthur had passed away at 92, but his apprentices continued the carpentry workshop, teaching the trade to new generations. Eleanor, the retired teacher who had become a key partner in the project, lived to be 95, always active in the Foundation's educational coordination. In his will, he left all his assets to the institution, along with a letter that read, "This foundation gave me the opportunity to discover that retirement can be the most productive period of life when we use our experience to serve others." The house where George Harrison had raised his 3 children was transformed into the historical headquarters of the Foundation, preserving the original environment as a memorial and visitor center. The family portrait still hung on the same wall, but now beside it were dozens of other photographs showing the families that had been transformed by the project. The secret safe remained open, turned into a small exhibition where visitors could read the original letter that George Harrison had left for Arthur. Next to the letter, a plaque explained, "True inheritance is not what we keep in safes, but what we plant in people's hearts." Arthur kept a simple office at the historical headquarters, but spent most of his time visiting projects across the country. At 70 years old, he still traveled regularly to train new coordinators and monitor the development of communities benefiting from the Harrison methodology. During one of these trips, Arthur visited a rural community in the interior of Minas Gerais, where the Foundation had implemented a sustainable family farming project. As he walked through the lush green fields, where formerly impoverished families now produced organic food for the entire region, he remembered the phrase that Captain used to repeat, "Teach them to fly, teach them to fly." The parrot had understood from the very beginning what the true essence of the work needed to be, not just solving immediate problems, but teaching people to develop their own capacities for overcoming and growth. That afternoon, walking through the blooming fields under a vast blue sky, Arthur felt deep gratitude for having had the wisdom to trust the seemingly absurd guidance of a parrot. Without that trust, he would never have discovered the true inheritance his father had left, the ability to transform lives through service to others. When he turned 75, Arthur decided to write his memoirs in a book titled The Wisdom of Captain. The work became a national bestseller, inspiring thousands of people to rethink their priorities in life and discover ways to contribute to their communities. All copyright royalties from the book were donated to the George Harrison Foundation, generating resources that allowed the reach of community projects to expand even further. Arthur died peacefully at the age of 81, on a Sunday afternoon after the traditional family lunch at the Foundation's headquarters. His last words were, "Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Dad. The mission continues." Victoria and Grant, now the only surviving members of the original family, kept all the Foundation's projects running and expanding. The children and grandchildren of the Harrison siblings grew up involved in community work, ensuring the family legacy would continue for generations to come. In the garden of the historical headquarters, near the symbolic grave of Captain, a wooden bench was installed with a commemorative plaque. Arthur Harrison, the son who inherited a parrot and discovered he had gained the world. Children from the community often play around this memorial, listening to stories about the wise parrot who taught an entire family to discover the true meaning of wealth. Occasionally, some of these children swear they can hear a parrot humming cheerful melodies among the garden trees, as if Captain was still watching over the family he helped reunite. The George Harrison Foundation exists to this day, more than 50 years after the reading of that seemingly unfair will that started it all. It continues transforming lives, reuniting families, and proving daily that the most valuable inheritance a father can leave his children is not money in the bank, but wisdom in the heart and purpose in life. And somewhere, in a dimension beyond our limited understanding, George Harrison watches with infinite pride as a green and yellow parrot became the instrument of a transformation he always dreamed of seeing in his family. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The story of the Harrison family became a case study in business and social work universities as an example of how sustainable community development can transform not only the communities served, but also the people providing the assistance. Researchers from various academic institutions regularly visited the historic headquarters of the George Harrison Foundation to study the methodology developed by the siblings and understand the factors that made the project so successful over decades. One of the most interesting conclusions from these studies was how the personalized and respectful approach adopted by the Foundation created far superior results compared to traditional assistance programs. Instead of simply distributing resources, the Harrison methodology focused on discovering and enhancing the natural abilities of each assisted family. Victoria had meticulously documented all legal aspects of the Foundation's work, creating a best practices manual that became a national reference for non-profit organizations. Her community law firm had expanded to include a human rights school where young lawyers learn to use their professional skills to serve underserved communities. Grant had systematized his business mentoring techniques into a training program being implemented in small business incubators across the country. His logistics company had become a cooperative where former Foundation beneficiaries could join as partners, creating a solidarity economy model that inspired hundreds of other businesses. But the deepest impact of the Harrison siblings' work was in the transformed communities themselves. Neighborhoods once known for violence and poverty had become examples of sustainable development and social harmony. The transformation wasn't just economic, it was cultural. The communities served by the Foundation developed a culture of collaboration and solidarity that naturally perpetuated through generations. Young people who had grown up seeing their families helped by the Foundation became adults who naturally helped other families. Small business owners mentored by Grant became mentors to new entrepreneurs. Families who had received legal guidance from Victoria became multipliers of basic legal information in their communities. The model created by the Harrison siblings proved that it is possible to break cycles of poverty and social exclusion through well-planned interventions that respect the dignity and enhance the capabilities of the people served. 30 years after the reading of the original will, delegations from other countries began visiting the George Harrison Foundation to study the methodology and adapt it to their own cultural and economic realities. Representatives of African organizations were impressed by how sustainable family farming projects had transformed rural communities in the United States. Asian delegations studied the micro-entrepreneurship models that had generated thousands of successful small family businesses. Europeans interested in solidarity economy came to learn about the cooperative systems Grant had developed. American specialists in community development wanted to understand how the Harrison methodology achieved such consistent results over decades. Arthur, in the final years of his life, had received invitations to present the Foundation's history at Harvard, Oxford, Sorbonne, and other prestigious international institutions. He always began these presentations by showing a photo of Captain and telling how it all started with a seemingly worthless parrot. "My father understood something that most people take a lifetime to discover," Arthur used to say to fascinated international audiences. "True wealth isn't about accumulating resources for ourselves, but about using our resources to multiply opportunities for others." Arthur's presentations always ended with a conclusion that moved audiences around the world. You might think this is a story about family inheritance, about community development, or about a solidarity economy. But actually, it's a story about discovering that each of us has the ability to leave the world a little better than we found it. My father used a parrot to teach us that lesson. What method will you use to teach it to your children? The question always sparked intense discussions and inspired many people to rethink their own life priorities. In the last months of his life, Arthur used to spend afternoons sitting on the memorial bench in the Foundation's garden, watching the activity at the historic headquarters. Children running through the hallways, families being assisted by social workers, small entrepreneurs attending training courses, university students doing volunteer work. It was a constant movement of life and hope that he knew would continue long after his own existence. The Foundation had become a solid, sustainable institution that no longer depended on the physical presence of the founders to keep functioning. During one of those contemplative afternoons, Arthur was approached by a girl of about 8 years old who regularly visited the Foundation's headquarters with her family. The child had been born into one of the families assisted by the early projects and had grown up considering the Foundation her second home. "Mr. Arthur," the girl asked with the natural curiosity of children, "is it true that all this started because of a parrot that could talk?" Arthur smiled and gestured for her to sit beside him on the memorial bench. "It's true, yes. Captain was a very special parrot who taught me important things about life." "What kind of things?" the girl asked, her eyes shining with interest. "Captain taught me that sometimes the most valuable inheritances come wrapped in ways that seem insignificant," Arthur replied, choosing words a child could understand. "He also taught me that true wealth lies in helping other people discover their own talents." "I wish I could have met Captain," the girl said with a nostalgic sigh. "You know what?" Arthur said, pointing to all the activity around them. "Captain is still here. Every time someone helps another person at this Foundation, Captain's spirit is present. Every time a family discovers a way to improve their lives, Captain is singing with joy." The girl was thoughtful for a few moments before asking, "So if I help my family and other people, I'll be continuing Captain's work?" "Exactly," Arthur confirmed, feeling a deep emotion as he realized how the legacy was being naturally passed on to a new generation. "You, your children, your grandchildren, all of you can continue the mission that Captain started." That afternoon, watching the girl run back to her family with renewed enthusiasm, Arthur felt that his own mission was truly complete. The Captain's wisdom had taken root so deeply in the community's culture that it would continue to flourish for generations, regardless of any one person's physical presence. The story of the parrot that changed one family and transformed thousands of lives had become much more than an interesting anecdote. It had become a philosophy of life that proved daily that anyone, regardless of their starting point, has the potential to make a difference in the world if they find ways to use their talents to serve others. And so, on a golden autumn afternoon, Arthur Harrison closed his eyes for the last time, knowing that the most precious legacy his father had left, the ability to transform lives through love and service, would live on forever in the hearts of all those who had been touched by the seemingly simple wisdom of a green and yellow parrot named Captain. End of the story. Now tell us what you thought of this emotional story and where you are watching us from. If you know someone who also needs to discover that life's most valuable inheritances don't come in the form of money, share this story. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other narratives that will touch your heart and transform your perspective on what truly matters in life.